He was the ruler of one of the most powerful empires on earth, the Roman Emperor, protected by legions, feared across continents. Yet somehow, he ended up in chains behind the capture of a Roman emperor by the Muslim forces, a story buried under centuries of silence, captured by the very people the West once called desert nomads. The Muslims. How did this happen? Was it strategy, divine fate, or a brutal twist of history? This is not just a story of war, it's a story of intelligence, courage, and a moment that shook the Roman world to its core. Stay with us as we uncover the real events. Welcome to Decoding History and Science, where forgotten truths, ancient mysteries, and untold stories come to life. Subscribe and join us on a journey through time. The rise of two superpowers. It was a geopolitical shockwave. At the dawn of the 7th century, two unstoppable forces were rising on opposite ends of the ancient world. One rooted in centuries of empire and tradition, the other burning with the fire of a new world order. No one could have predicted what came next. Their leadership was strategic, their commanders brilliant, and their soldiers deeply committed. The caliphate grew rapidly under the leadership of the rightly guided caliphs, followed by the Umayyad dynasty, who pushed the Islamic Empire into a global force. He was bold, confident, and determined to restore Roman glory. His eyes were fixed on the Eastern, the growing threat of the Seljuk Turks, a Muslim power rising swiftly through Persia and Anatolia, who rose to the throne of the Byzantine Empire in the year 1068 CE. His reign came at a time of deep instability. He wasn't just defending territory, he was defending the very identity of the Roman Empire. Their brilliant leader, Alp Arslan, had already made a name for himself as a tactician and warrior. His forces moved like the wind, fast, precise, and deadly. The empire was under pressure from within and under attack from outside. To the west, the mighty Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of the once great Roman Empire, stood tall. Its capital, Constantinople, was a fortress of wealth, power, and military might. The Byzantine emperors ruled with iron and gold to push back the Seljuk Turks under the leadership of Alp Arslan, who were steadily advancing into Byzantine territory. His goal, Romanos believed this was his moment to reclaim lost lands and prove himself as a great emperor and commander. Surprisingly, Romanos rejected it, confident that his superior numbers and Roman tactics would win the day. What was supposed to be a routine military campaign for the Byzantine Empire slowly chipped away at the Roman army, using highly mobile horse archers and hit-and-run tactics. Especially Andronikos Dakis, who fled the battlefield and left Romanos exposed. Confusion spread. Parts of the Byzantine army were betrayed by their own generals, turned into one of the most catastrophic defeats in its long, proud history. Within just a few decades of the Prophet's death, Muslim forces had swept across vast lands, from the sands of Arabia to the heartlands of Persia and Syria, commanding vast armies and holding on to centuries of imperial dominance. Once feared across continents, was now kneeling before a Muslim sultan. They were seen as the world's superpower, culturally refined and militarily seasoned. But to the south, a new power was awakening in the Arabian Peninsula. A movement led by Prophet Muhammad had united the once divided Arab tribes into a single forced Islamic caliphate. This wasn't just a religious revolution. The Muslims weren't just fighting to expand, they were fighting with purpose, discipline, and belief. And then, these two powers collided. It wasn't just a clash of armies, it was a battle of civilizations. Who was the captured Roman emperor? But they carried the banner of Islam and were expanding fast, The emperor in question was Emperor Romanos, the fourth Diogenes, a seasoned military man. But Romanos was not a man to back down. The Seljuks were not Arabs. Romanos believed he could stop them. In 1071 CE, he personally led a massive Byzantine army to crush the Seljuks and reclaim control over the eastern provinces. But what Romanos didn't know was that this campaign would lead to one of the most humiliating defeats in Roman history, and that a Roman emperor would become a prisoner of the Muslims. The battle that changed everything the year was 1071 CE. The place, a small town in eastern Anatolia called Manzikert, near modern-day Turkey. The Byzantines, spread thin and disorganized, marched forward while the Seljuk Emperor Romanos, for Diogenes, had assembled a massive army, nearly 40,000 men. But Alp Arslan had other plans. Instead of avoiding confrontation, the Seljuk leader offered peace. What followed was a masterclass in military strategy. The Battle of Manzikert unfolded on August 26, 1071. Surrounded, exhausted, and betrayed, the emperor fought bravely until the very end, and then the unthinkable happened. A Roman emperor was captured. Alive, Romanos for Diogenes, ruler of the Byzantine Empire. This was not just a military loss, it was a historic turning point. The moment of capture, the sun was setting on the battlefield of Manzikert. But for the Byzantine Empire, it felt like the sun was setting on an entire era. As chaos engulfed the Roman lines, Emperor Romanos IV, Diogenes, found himself stranded, his army collapsing. His generals, betraying him, recognized the heavily armored man at the center of the resistance. Surrounded, exhausted, and bleeding, Romanos was finally captured. Not killed, captured, and his last loyal guards falling one by one. Still, Romanos refused to run. Alp Arslan treated Romanos with unexpected dignity. Historical accounts describe the Sultan even placing his boot on the emperor's neck knot out of cruelty, but as a symbol that absolute power had shifted hands. He drew his sword and fought like a soldier, not a king. But there comes a moment when even courage can't change fate. Seljuk warriors, swift and skilled, a Roman emperor once considered untouchable, was now a prisoner of the Muslims. He was brought before Sultan Alp Arslan, the Seljuk leader. But what happened next stunned the world. Instead of mocking or killing him, and yet the Sultan didn't execute him. Stripped of the throne, humiliated, and betrayed yet again, Romanos was captured by his own people. In a cruel twist, they blinded him a common punishment in Byzantine politics and exiled him until his death. He forgave him. The Byzantines had been a dominant force in the Christian world. The emperor was seen as God's representative on earth. In the years that followed, Turkish Muslims flooded into Anatolia, establishing what would eventually become the heartland of the Ottoman Empire. The defeat also weakened Byzantine defenses so badly that it set the stage for the First Crusade, as European Christians scrambled to save the remnants of the Eastern Roman world. It was a move that shocked many, who treated him with an unusual level of respect for a prisoner. Instead of being paraded as a trophy of war or executed, Romanos was offered terms of peace. Captured by his own countrymen, Romanos surrendered under the promise of mercy. Alp Arslan had all the power, yet he chose diplomacy. That single decision turned him from a conqueror into a legend. Deliver strategic fortresses and send tribute in gold every year to the Seljuks. It was a humiliating deal for a Roman emperor, but it was better than death. The act was so violent and poorly done that it left him disfigured and infected, and he suffered in agony. He was then released and escorted back toward his empire, in Battleland, perhaps the only one to be spared by the very people he came to destroy. The throne had been seized by Michael VII, the son of the man Romanos had originally displaced. The empire Romanos fought to protect no longer wanted him, and now he had been brought to his knees by a Muslim sultan. Shocked at what happened after his release was perhaps even more tragic. This moment wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. The Muslim world had captured a Roman emperor, not through treachery or trickery, but through strategy, discipline, and sheer force of will. And the world would never see the Byzantines the same way again. Aftermath and shockwaves, it was a psychological earthquake. The news spread like wildfire across the medieval world. The Roman emperor had been captured by Muslims. This wasn't just a military defeat. For centuries, the Roman Empire, especially its eastern half, but the story didn't end with chains. After a brief captivity, Sultan Alp Arslan released Romanos IV not for gold or land, but in exchange for a peace treaty and an annual tribute. However, for Romanos, freedom was only the beginning of his downfall. When he returned to Constantinople, he found his empire in political chaos. His enemies had already seized power during his absence. The man who once ruled an empire died alone, disgraced, and forgotten by his own. But the battle he lost Manzikert far beyond his life. It marked the beginning of the decline of the Byzantine Empire. In just one day, the balance of power between East and West had changed forever. And it all started with the capture of a single man. What happened to the emperor? The capture of Emperor Romanos for Diogenes was already a historical following his defeat at Manzikert. Romanos spent about a week in captivity under Sultan Alp Arslan. He agreed to pay a large ransom, but the Byzantines had already moved on. In his absence, a powerful noble family, the Diogenes family, had declared him deposed. As he returned to reclaim his authority, he was ambushed by the forces of his rival. But mercy was not given. He was blinded, a brutal and irreversible punishment used to ensure no return to power. The once glorious emperor who faced Muslim sultans with courage died in exile on a remote island just a few years later. In 1072 CE, he was forgotten by his empire, erased from glory, but never forgotten by history, because Romanos IV remains one of the only Roman emperors to be captured alive. Legacy of the capture of Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes at the Battle of Manzikert didn't just shake the foundations of the Byzantine Empire, it marked the beginning of a new era. For the Byzantines, it was the moment the illusion of invincibility shattered. Never before had a Roman emperor been captured alive by a Muslim power and then returned only to be discarded and mutilated by his own people. The event exposed the empire's internal divisions, corrupt politics, and weakening military might. But for the Muslim world, it was a statement to the rest of the world. The age of Islamic military dominance was far from over. The capture of Romanos was remembered as a symbol of both Islamic power and Christian vulnerability. The Seljuk Turks, inspired by their victory, surged deeper into Anatolia, the very heartland of the Byzantine Empire. The Muslim treatment of Romanos stood out in history. Sultan Alp Arslan's mercy toward his enemy became legendary. In a time when rulers were often brutal and vengeful, their works are filled with both admiration and bitterness. Some portray Romanos as a noble leader who was betrayed by corrupt elites. They speak highly of Sultan Alp Arslan's leadership and the stunning victory at Manzikert. They emphasize the Sultan's restraint and diplomacy, describing how he honored the captured emperor even when he didn't have to. Others frame him as arrogant and politically reckless someone who brought ruin upon himself and the empire, and was often used to justify the need for military campaigns against the rising Muslim powers. The capture of Emperor Romanos for Diogenes is not without its shadows of mystery and controversy. While the main events are widely accepted, historians still debate several key details, especially because much of what we know comes from conflicting sources. He chose dignity over destruction. Within just a few decades, what was once Christian territory became firmly Muslim. Towns were renamed, mosques were built, and new cultures began to flourish. The events around the capture of Romanos IV became a symbol of the collapse of an old world order. But the impact of what happened that day on to that emperor can still be felt in the shape of the modern Middle East and Europe. And echoed all the way into the Crusades, set the stage for the fall of Byzantium. Centuries of bloodshed and belief that would reshape East and West forever. And the rise of something new, an Islamic Anatolia, a weakened Byzantium, and a world soon to be shaken by the Crusades. How many still believe that history is black and white when stories like this prove it's made of endless shades, which would eventually conquer Constantinople? Itself, in 1453, this shift laid the groundwork for the rise of the Ottoman Empire. The psychological impact of Manzikert was massive, challenged the mainstream, and bring truth to the surface with every episode and what comes next. The defeat was so devastating that some historians have called it the Byzantine Hastings. It was a moment where the world changed direction, a symbol of how empires rise and fall, a reminder that no power is permanent, that betrayal can come from within, and that mercy, even in victory, leaves a deeper legacy than destruction ever could. A reference to the English defeat that led to a complete change in rulers and history. In the Christian West, the fear of Islamic expansion following Manzikert helped trigger the launch of the First Crusade just 2 decades later. But there's a deeper legacy, one of unexpected honor. Still echoes through time, because despite the bloodshed and political chaos, and that moment, that rare act of restraint in the middle of a brutal war, tell a different story. Historical sources and debates, like many legendary moments in history. On the Byzantine side, chroniclers like Michael Attaliates and John Skylitzes documented Romanos's reign, fall, and humiliation. The Muslim sources, especially Persian and Arabic historians like Ibn al-Athir, interestingly, even Western Christian sources later crusade chroniclers mention the capture as a cautionary tale. It became symbolic of the Byzantine Empire's vulnerability, yet not all details are crystal clear. Was Romanos truly treated with kindness by Alp Arslan, or have later accounts romanticized that moment? Did Romanos negotiate the treaty himself, or was it forced upon him under duress? And most importantly, did the empire fall because of this one battle, or was it already rotting from within? Historians agree on one thing. Manzikert was not just a military defeat, it was a historical pivot point. In the end, separating fact from myth can be difficult. History is not just a series of dates and dead empires at SA Mirror, reflecting who we are today. The capture of Emperor Romanos IV, Diogenes by a Muslim sultan, wasn't just a moment of war or politics. The Battle of Manzikert didn't just alter the fate of one emperor, reshaped entire civilizations. It opened the door to Turkish dominance in Anatolia, and yet how many of us were taught this in school? If you found this story eye-opening, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Decoding History and Science, where we uncover the forgotten, Like this video if you believe real history deserves to be told the way it happened, not watered down or hidden in the margins. Comment below what surprised you most about this story. Was it the betrayal, the mercy, the political downfall? Share this video with someone who loves history but might have never heard this chapter before. Together, let's keep these stories alive, because history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the world we live in now.